Okay, cool. Go ahead, please.
Okay. All right, perfect. So thank you so much for joining me. I know it's late in the evening where you guys are. It's still midday for me, so the sun is shining. But um, let me make sure, just do a quick volume check if you guys are having any troubles hearing me. If you could drop a note in chat and let me know, so I can ensure everybody can hear. So as was mentioned, I'm one of the trainers at GitHub, and we, of course, love doing these types of sessions where we get to talk to folks who are in the community and doing work, hopefully using GitHub or some Git version control system, but really to kind of share some of the lessons that we've learned as we travel around to different organizations, you both large and small, and understand some of the challenges that they're facing, because you guys, as a contracting group, are in a unique position where you're probably called in a lot of times to help out when folks are overwhelmed or when they are trying new things and they need your expertise. So I was really excited about doing this session and chatting with you guys a little bit about some of the things that we've learned. And I want to make sure that this is a two-way session, so I will present some information on Eclipse and GitHub workflow, and then I want to make sure that we leave some time at the end for questions and answers. So if you have questions as we go along, please do feel free to pop those in the GoToWebinar chat panel, and I will, if I can get to them during the class or they make sense in the flow, I'll do them during class, but otherwise I'll plan to take a few minutes at the end and answer any questions you have. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into it. Most of you know what Git is, and hopefully also know what GitHub is. GitHub, of course, being a place to store your projects or your repositories where you're working with your clients, or you're working with open source projects, or really any type of code-based, text-based project. So what we want to talk about today is how do we use the GitHub Flow, or how do we effectively use Git and GitHub with Eclipse, because that's a tool that I know a lot of folks use when they're working with Java. And I understand that some of you also use IntelliJ. That'll have to be a conversation for a different day, and maybe we can come back and do that one in a couple of months. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to go ahead and open Eclipse here. And when I open Eclipse, of course, it's going to ask me to select my workspace. So I will already have a workspace set up there in my Scratch directory, so I'm going to use that workspace. And so one of the assumptions that I make, since I know I haven't had a chance to speak with you individually, is I'm going to make an assumption that you haven't used Eclipse a lot. For whatever reason, you may be new to Eclipse, or maybe you have some experience with Eclipse, but bear with me. This first section will go fairly quick, but it's just meant to be a high-level overview of Eclipse itself and understanding the products and the capabilities that it has. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take a look at if you're using, I believe it's Juno or newer, there is a plugin called the eGit plugin. That plugin is what you need in order to use Git inside of Eclipse. So if you look, there's a eclipse.org/eGit. That is the site that you would use to get to that download if you are using a version older than Juno. However, if you've downloaded this anytime in the last couple of years, I think eGit has been included or is packaged with Eclipse. So hopefully everyone has Eclipse and eGit already installed. So let's just take a look at Eclipse real quick. And we know that when we're working with Eclipse, our primary view is our programming language view, or Java in this case. It could be C++, so either one. But the primary view here is our Project Explorer or our Package Explorer. This is the one we use most often. Now, in order to also use Eclipse, we need to have that plugin. But you'll notice that there's nothing on my screen right now that screams Git to me, and that's because I need to open a different perspective. I need to open the Git perspective. So to do that, I would come to Eclipse and click on Windows, Perspective, Open Perspective, and then Other. And then one of my choices here will be Git. Now, the other thing that I've learned from spending lots of time on site with customers who are using Eclipse is that commonly folks who use Eclipse don't want to jump around between windows. You want to be able to stay in one perspective and do everything from that single perspective. So what I want to show you first is the workflow as it would be if we were using different perspectives, just so we can keep the separate steps in our mind. But then towards the end, I'm going to show you how to customize your workspace so that you can use all of the views that you need within just one perspective. So that'll be our goal for the end here. All right. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a project. If you'll bear with me for just a second, I'm going to grab my code that I wrote ahead of time so that you don't have to sit here and wait for me to type things out. All right. So we have our Java's perspective, we have our Git perspective. The other thing that we need to do is we need to do a couple of configuration pieces within Git. So let's do that real quick before we move on. So within Eclipse itself, we're going to go to Preferences. And under Preferences, you probably, if you've used Git, are familiar with the sheer number and exciting options that are available here to us. But we want to go down here to Team. So the other nice thing about Git in Eclipse is that the team that wrote the eGit plugin went to great lengths to try to standardize across the different version control systems. So if you are coming to Git from a different version control system like Subversion, those plugins, they've gone to a lot of trouble to try to keep the language and the general functionality the same. So there'll be a few things that are different. There'll be a few minor tweaks that you'll need to learn and to become accustomed to. But I think if you've used it before, you'll see a lot familiar too. So one of those things is that we go to the team. We go to the team preferences whenever we want to do something with Git. So Git's always going to be nested under that team. And then we have our Git options, and let's go over here to configuration. When we set configuration, if you look up here at the top of the screen, I can set configuration at 3 different levels. With Git, and this is a Git thing as well as an Eclipse plugin thing, I can set my configuration at 3 different spots. I can do the user settings, which is going to set those in the .config file, which means for any repository that I have on my account, it's going to take those settings. I have the system settings, which are actually for any user on the account, and I have repository settings, which are specific to a single repository. And where we see people a lot of times use these repository settings are when they work both in what we call inner source as well as open source projects. And so it might be that you have within your organization one username and login and credentials that you use, but maybe you work on some open source projects as well on behalf of your organization and you use a different username there. So there will be times when you're going to need to set these differently, but most of what you're going to set is either going to be in these user settings, which is for all of the repositories on your machine, or in the repository settings, which is repository specific. So going to the user settings, I have an option down here for user email and username. So these are the 2 key pieces of information that Git needs in order to create a commit on my behalf. So we'll talk more about that in just a second if you're not familiar with the terminology that we're using. But let's just for now make sure that Git knows my name and my email. So if I needed to add something here, so let me just actually remove one for the fun of it, and I'll go over here to add entry, and I would simply type user.name, which is the key, and then the value, which is my real name, and I'm going to actually be GitHub teacher for today. So the value will be GitHub teacher. So I'll set that value, and now you can see that it's set it in the config. So the 2 you need are user.name and user.email. At a bare minimum, those are the ones you want to have set. So we'll go ahead and apply that and clear out of those settings. So that was the only thing we needed to worry about within the settings themselves. So let's start our project. So you guys are probably familiar with a Java project, so I'm going to go through these steps fairly quick. I'm just going to open a new project. I'm going to create a Java project here.
Yes.
I'm going to call mine My Hello World. And let's create a package here. And let's create a class. Okay, so now I have my class. Let me just paste in this super complex code that I've written here. And we'll save that and close it. Okay, so from this point, I probably haven't shown you anything new. I've shown you how to create a project with a package and a class and inserted some text, some hello world text into a class file. So let's talk about now what actually makes things different for us when we're working in Git. So when we work in Git itself, we use the Git perspective. When I come to the Git perspective, you'll notice the first thing is that I have nothing listed under Git repositories. So in this case, just because I created the project, I had the eGit plugin and all of that, so I still have to say I want this project to be version controlled. So to do that, I'm going to need to add an existing repository. Well, unfortunately, at this point, Git doesn't even know that this repository exists. So let's go back to our Java view for just a minute. We're going to go to that project. We can right-click there, and we can go to the team option all the way down here at the bottom, and then we're going to choose the option to share project.
Cynthia, just to add one thing, somehow I'm not able to see the full view. So maybe now I see this pop-up is coming, configure Git repository. So maybe you need to adjust, few things. Like when you're
Okay.
it's difficult, but somehow I'm not able to see the full screen. I thought, okay,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, let me see what I can do. Let me, can you at least see configure repository so I can get out of this one real quick?
Yeah, this pop-up box you're saying?
Yes.
Yes, I can see half of that. Like maybe it's just being in the center. Maybe take on the right side.
Take it on the right side?
Yeah, now it's fine. So yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty wild. All right, let's see what we can do to troubleshoot that here in just a second then. So let me finish the steps for creating my repository, and then we'll narrow down the screen to a portion that you can see.
Yeah.
So now what I want to do is I want to click this button here to use or create a repository in the parent folder of the project. So this is going to say, okay, here's the project that I have. Let's create a repository now. Now that you can see it's a Git repository, and I can say finish. And as I do that, let me shrink this screen down so you can see this one.
Yeah.
All right, can you see all of that one?
Yeah, it's much better.
Okay, yeah, I don't know, that's crazy. Can you see the bottom down here?
Yeah, bottom. At least I can see. But
Okay.
this, yeah.
Okay, all right, great, thanks. I'm sorry about that. I've never had that happen before.
Let's do
All
a
right.
poll. Let's ask guys. Guys, you can raise your hand if you're able to see the screen. Yeah. So I think Mukesh is saying yes. Yeah. So let's wait for the guys. So guys, you can see the screen, the editor on your screen. There's options there to raise your hand. So you can raise your hand and it will just, I think I've seen one guy, the other guys as well. Okay, fine. Yeah, looks like, yeah, they're all good. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, we'll keep this one over here. So now that I have a Git project, if you look now, you'll see that it recognizes that I have a Git project now. It has question marks on each of those files that I created. Those question marks are telling me that these files are untracked. So right now, even though I've created a Git repository, Git still doesn't know that these files exist. So I need to take these files and I need to make them a part of my version control, make them a part of the history of my project. So we're going to do that over in that Git perspective. And if I look at the Git perspective, you can see I have some drop downs here. I have some branches, and I actually don't have any branches because I don't have a head. We'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. But basically what it's saying is, even though I know I should be a Git repository, I don't have anything to attach to yet. I have nothing to version control. So what we want to do now is we want to take the content from our project, and we do that through the Git Staging tab here.
Mhm.
So we want to take the content from our project and we want to add it to version control. And there's a couple of interesting files that I want to show you here. One of the files that's really important is this .gitignore file. So if I want to just see what's in these files, then I can just click on those files to see. And this is actually showing me a compare. So it's saying there was nothing before and now there will be something. It's not too exciting yet. It'll be more exciting later. But I can take a look at the content that's going to be added within this commit. So I'm just going to take all of these items here, and I can drag them down to this staged changes. And now the important thing is here, why did we have to do that step? Like, this seems like an extra step. The reason we do this is Git uses what's called a two-stage commit process. So really what's happening is you have three working trees when you're using Git. You have what's called your working directory, which is where you're actively making changes to file. It holds anything that's a new file or a file that's been modified since the last time that you created a commit. When you're ready to create a commit, you're going to take those files and you're going to move them to what's called the staging area, as you can see here. What the staging area is I like to think of that as getting all of my family together with all of the kids and the dogs and the grandparents and trying to take a picture of everyone and get everybody in just the right spot. So the staging area is where I'm kind of collecting and composing those commits that I am going to add to my next snapshot of the project. So a commit, as I mentioned before, I told you we get back to that and what that means. What it is it's a snapshot of your project at a specific point in time. So it's essentially saying at this point in time, these are the files in what those files looked like that were contents of this particular project. It's different than other version control systems. A lot of other version control systems collect deltas, so it's actually going to collect that information over time, and then if you want to see what your project looked like at a previous point in time, it has to go back through and add up all of those deltas so that it can see what your project looked like. The difference with Git is that it is instead just taking a snapshot of here is the content of the repository at this point in time. Now that sounds heavy and cumbersome, but it's not. What it's actually doing is it's creating a compression hash. It's taking every object that's in your repository. It's creating a 40-character hexadecimal string that represents a SHA-1 hash, if you will, of the content of that file. It is then taking all of those SHA-1 hashes and combining them into a tree and recompressing that, and then it's taking the commit itself and attaching to that tree. So it's a process of compression, and if you didn't get all that, that's okay. I can refer you to a great book that does a good job of explaining it in a minute. But the key point here is that it's taking a snapshot. It's not just saving what's changed, it's saving the entire repository. So the staging area is what allows us to say, here's what I want to be a part of this next snapshot. So if, for example, I only wanted maybe those core files that I set. Maybe I only wanted the auto-generated files that were originally built by Java or by Eclipse to be a part of this first commit, and I wanted to commit my hello world file separately, then I could do that. So I don't want to do that though. I'm going to actually just bring them all down here and commit everything at the same time. So once I'm ready, I enter my commit message. So the commit message is, it's kind of like writing the story of your file, if you will. So it's a brief message. It's meant to be about 50 characters long, and it's meant to explain the change that is introduced by the files that are sitting in your staging area right now. So in this case, it's pretty easy. I am initializing my project. So I'm going to use the option down here. Once I've typed my commit message, I'm going to click this commit option. And when I do, without much fanfare, the actual commit happens. So now that I have committed my project, you'll see that I have a change up here. So before it said my hello world no head, now it says my hello world master. So now I officially have a project. So those were the steps that we go through to officially get a project in Eclipse. And that's based, of course, on creating the project from scratch. So I'm going to show you in a little while that it's actually even easier if you're creating a clone of a project or a project that already exists on GitHub. You can pull it down into Eclipse and work with it fairly easily. So now that we have this repository, there's a couple of things that I want to cover here with what we do with this repository. The first thing that we want to talk about is the flow. So when we start thinking about the GitHub flow, why does this matter? So we just talked about how Git does these snapshots of our project at points in time. And all the work we've done so far has been on our master branch. And in this diagram, our master branch is represented by this kind of heavy blue line that we have up here at the top. So that heavy blue line represents master, which also represents the production copy of our code. So we think of that as the version of the code that's live in the world today. Our customers are using it. So when we want to do experimentation, when we want to fix bugs, when we want to try new things, we don't want to do that on the version of the code that's live in front of our customers. Instead, we want to create a branch. So to do that, we'll create a branch, and then once we're on that branch, we will add some commits. So this branch is essentially creating a sandbox. It's saying, I'm going to isolate this work from master so that I can work on my features without disrupting anything that's in production. I add my commits. Once I've added a couple of commits, I'm going to open a pull request. So a pull request is a GitHub thing. So if you're working with a different version control system or you're not working with GitHub at all, then you may not see the pull request process, but essentially a pull request is just a place for you to have a discussion about the changes you're proposing to the code. So once you've opened your pull request, there'll be some additional discussion that happens. The other thing a pull request does for us in the typical corporate environment is a pull request is also where CI is run. So if you have continuous integration and automated testing set up on your repository, that would happen as the pull request. Each time the pull request receives an update or a new commit, it kicks off the build, which then will run all of your automated tests for you. So pull request is a super important part of the flow, just in terms of not only the collaboration, but also in ensuring that you're introducing good code in your project. Then we have our favorite little ship it squirrel here. The ship it squirrel just represents the deploy process. For us, we deploy from branches. So we will actually deploy from our feature branch, and then as long as everything stays happy in production, we'll then merge that branch into our master line of work. So some folks, however, prefer to merge and then deploy, which is, again, it's a workflow question within your organization. All right, so with that, let's go back over to our project. And let's look at how we would do these steps if we were just using Eclipse. Now, the first thing that you probably realize is that we don't have a repository on GitHub right now. So I can only do a part of the process. I can say it. I can't do it. Or I can do it. I just can't say it. So I can only do part of the process right now because I don't have a repository on GitHub. So let's figure out, how do I take this repository and get it up somewhere where my team can work on it with me? So to do that, I'm going to come back over here to my GitHub teacher account on github.com, and I'm going to, on the top right-hand side here, and can everybody see this okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So on the top right-hand side here, I'm going to create a new repository. I'm really going to create a new repository. There it goes. Okay. And I'm just going to call it the same thing. I'm going to call it My Hello World. All right, I'm going to leave my repository public. And then I'm actually not going to check any of these other options down here at the bottom. I'm just going to create a repository. And when I do, it gives me the information I need in order to move my repository from Eclipse onto GitHub. So what I need is I actually need this clone URL right here, or this repository URL. So let me copy that to my clipboard and reopen Eclipse. And now when I come to my repository, the first thing that I want to do is I want to be able to push this repository up to GitHub. But I have to tell it where that is first, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to Remote, and I'm going to choose the Push option. When I do, you'll see that Eclipse is smart, and it grabs that URL that I had on my clipboard. It pre-fills the information for me. It tells it my connection information. It asks me for my username and password for authentication. Now you can save this. I won't save it today. All right. And so now what it's asking me is it's saying push refs, select refs to push. A ref is a branch. So when you're thinking about, earlier we said that we had this master branch, and that's the only thing we have right now. That's essentially what we're doing, is we're just saying, I want you to push from the master branch, and notice that now it automatically sets up and says that I want the same branch on GitHub. So that's one specification for my push. That's the only branch I have right now, so I'm just going to leave that as my single specification and click Finish. And when I do, you can see that it tells me it has pushed to master up on github.com. So that all looks good. So let's go back over to GitHub. And there's my project. So just that easy. I sent my project up to GitHub. So the next thing I want to do is I want to now, let's use that GitHub Flow that we were talking about just a second ago to make some changes to our project. And I think the thing that I'll do, just because it's glaringly obvious and yelling at me that I need to do it, is I'm going to add a README to the repository that shows people what this project is about. So I can do that from here. You'll notice it even gives me the nice little button, and it would open a text editor and let me do all of that work there. But that's just not fun. We want to play with Eclipse today. So let's go back over to Eclipse. Now from Eclipse, everything still looks kind of the same here, but what I want to do is I want to go to my branches following this workflow that we were using earlier. So I want to go to my branches, and I'm going to create a new branch. So I'll right-click on branches, switch to, and then choose the new branch option. Let me give my branch a name, which is going to be add README. Now I have some options down here. One of those is configure upstream for push and pull. So remember a second ago when I was pushing the repository for the first time and it had all of those questions about refs? So apparently I can skip that step the next time by simply doing that configuration now. So what it's saying is create a relationship. So create this branch, but when you do, create a relationship between this local branch that I'm going to have on my machine and the branch that's going to be up on GitHub. Because for those of you who already use GitHub know the beauty of the distributed nature of Git is that I don't have to be connected when I'm working on this repository. So I don't have to be online connected to github.com in order to make changes, but Git patiently waits for me to be ready to synchronize and send these changes up. So I'm going to enter my branch name, choose the option to configure for push and pull. It gives me a couple of other options here. Merge upstream commits onto local branch, or rebase commits of a local branch onto upstream. So what's the difference? The difference is when I merge upstream commits into a local branch, I preserve history. So let's just say, for example, that my colleague Anna was in the process of working on the repository, and she's made some changes up on master. In the meantime, while I was working on the repository locally, I've made some changes on my branch. When I send my commits up to GitHub, I have two choices. I can either have our history interweave within itself exactly as it happened. So maybe Anna made a commit, and then I made a commit, and then Anna made a commit. Or we can do what's called a rebase. And what a rebase does is, and this is in super simplistic terms, so definitely not going to get into the nitty-gritty of rebase today, but a super simplistic explanation of rebase is that it's going to take my commits that I made, it's going to shift my branch so that it looks like my commits happened after Anna finished all of her commits. So it's a subtle difference, but it's a big difference because doing that actually rewrites history in a couple of different ways. So we want to make sure that when we choose these two options, we are cognizant of the workflow that we use with our team. And as a general rule, you're going to use a slightly different workflow for rebasing, because when you rebase, it rewrites history, and rewriting history on commits that have already been pushed up to GitHub in the past can be a bad thing. So let's stick with the first option right now. We want to merge upstream commits. The rebase conversation is definitely one for another day, but we can chat more about that in Q&A if we have time as well. All right, we're going to leave the checkout new branch selected. Let's click Finish. And now, again, without fanfare, you'll see that I have this new local branch called Add Readme, and it notes for me here at the top that I am on my Add Readme branch. Now, the good thing is that this branch selection is going to persist through any application I use. So let's just say, you know what, I decide that this particular file is just going to be easier to edit in a text editor, or this particular file is an image and maybe I need to go edit it in a different program altogether. That branch is going to persist through any program that we use, because right now this repository recognizes the fact that Add Readme is the current branch we're working on. So when I switch back to my Java perspective, you can see I am still on that Add Readme branch. So with that, let's go ahead and add a new file. We're going to add our new file here at the source level. And we're going to call that file readme.md. Now on GitHub, a readme.md is a special file. It is always rendered below the file tree in the repository. So when you're looking at the repository and you see a README in any folder of your repository, it's going to display the content directly below the file tree. So we like to use these kind of as the welcome mat to our repository. So for someone who's visiting, it tells them what the project's about, who the maintainers are, maybe how they can contribute, what contributions are needed. So all of those things can be in the README file. So let's go ahead and add some content. All right. You'll also see down here at the bottom that the Eclipse recognizes the markdown and gives me that preview. So that's a pretty standard Eclipse thing. So I'll go ahead and save that. And once again, I can go back over to Git. And when I get back over to Git, I go to Git Staging, and now I have this README file. And you can see that it's showing me here that it has this question mark. So again, it's saying this is an untracked file. So I can go through this step if I want to commit the file. I can drag it to Stage Changes and then type my commit message. The other option that I have is to right-click on the file here, and then from Team, choose the option to commit. When I do, it's going to pull up my commit message for me. So it automatically is going to stage it for me. You notice that we don't have that step anymore. We can open this step if we want to. So we can say I want to go to staging and have a little bit more control over what's going to be staged and what's not. So I can look at the staging view, but right now this is just going to go straight to the commit for me. So I can say adding a README. I select the files that I want to be part of this commit, and I click Commit. All right, so now if I look at my branch, I see something a little bit different. It shows me now, I'm still on my Hello World project. I'm on my Add README, and I have now this up arrow with 1 that's telling me that I have one commit that needs to be pushed. So it's telling me that I have a commit locally that doesn't exist up on GitHub. So it's an important thing to know. And if I look over at Git, I can also see now the history of my project. Or not. Maybe it doesn't want to show me my history today. Let's see here. All right, well, it doesn't want to show me my history. We'll come back to that. It's not being my friend. All right, so, but I have my README file, and I have, at this point, committed it, but it only exists locally. So if I look back at my repository, and I just refresh real quick my Hello World repository, I still have that nasty little banner down there that tells me I need to add a README. So let's go back to Eclipse. Let's go back to Git, and let's go to our Add README branch, and I'm simply going to right-click and tell it to push the branch Add README. It's going to ask me, where do you want to send it? I want to send it to the remote named origin. Origin is the default name that Git gives to the branch or to the primary remote. So in this case, our primary remote is myhelloworld.git. You can change this. You can name it anything you want to, but I recommend you leave it as origin just because it's pretty much standard. All right, so once again, it's asking me these questions about source. It's going to ask me to authenticate. Okay, so now it has pushed that branch up for me, and I've got to come back to my repository. I should now see, oh, there it goes. All right, it's taken in a couple seconds there. I was going to do it again, but it doesn't need it. All right. It's sad when you expect technology to work instantaneously all the time. All right, so now I have, you'll see I have a banner here. The banner recognizes that I have pushed branches, and I can do a compare and pull request. And let me shrink that screen to make sure everybody can see it. So I'll create my pull request, and all this pull request is if you remember our flow from a minute ago, I created a branch, I added some commits, which was essentially adding the README file. So now this gives us a chance to talk about the README file, decide whether we like it, whether we think different information should be included or not, so we can have a discussion. For the sake of time, we're not going to have a discussion. I'm just going to go ahead and merge this bad boy in. And I can delete my branch. So now let me come back over here to Eclipse. And now when I get back over here to Eclipse, what I want to do is I want to switch back to my master branch. So when I double click on that branch, it says, do you really want to check out master? Yes, I do really want to check out master. So I'm going to come back to my master branch, and I am going to, on my project, there it is. All right. It didn't want to give me the poll option for some reason. Sorry about that. So on the Project Explorer, I can right-click and go down to Team, and you can see all of your Git options usually within this Project Explorer in that Team menu, and the one we want is to pull. So we actually want to pull the changes down from GitHub to our local repository. Now what happens when we pull is that Git is going to do the same operations locally that it just did up on GitHub. So essentially before, what we did on GitHub was we took our branch, which was our add readme branch, and we merged it into master. So looking at that diagram, we took it, we merged it into master. So now what it's going to do is we're saying, okay, now bring those changes down to me locally. And when it does, it's going to take this master branch up here from GitHub, going to pull a copy of it down locally for me, and it's going to merge it into my copy of master that I have locally. So that's what it's doing here. It's telling me the fetch result is that it fetched master, and then it did a fast forward merge where it was merging the pull request into my local copy. So now my local copy of the repository on master looks just like my local copy or my copy of the repository up on GitHub. So from a 50,000-foot view, that's the GitHub flow. I know it was really fast. That's why we record this, so that you guys can go back and look at it later if you want to. A couple of other things I promised I would show you is if you don't want to have to skip between the different perspectives. So I know for me, working on the project perspective and then having to switch over to Git and see what's there can be a little bit tiring, but you can actually add views here. So if I go to Window and do Show View, and then choose under Show View Other, then one of the options that I have here is this Git Repositories. So that'll add this Git Repository tab right here on the same perspective. So I don't have to leave the Java perspective anymore to have access to my branches and other Git information that's contained here. You can do the same thing now with the other windows. So if you wanted to pull over your history window, let's see if history is going to cooperate with me now. There's my history. All right. I knew we had history. So you can see the history here is showing you, it's got this nice little diagram that shows you that we created a branch, we added a README, and then we merged that branch in. So the history is a way of navigating the work that's happened on your project. I can click on one of these on one of the commits to see more information about the commit itself. I can also from here, if I want to revert this commit, so maybe I decided, you know what, I didn't want to add a README file to this particular repository, I want to revert that commit, then you can certainly do that as well, which is just going to create a new commit that's the exact opposite of the commit that you created earlier. So that's what a commit does for us. You can also create a branch from this point. You can delete branches, rename, tags, there's tons of things that you can do here. Within the History Explorer for Git. So the history view is a good one, the staging view is a good one. Another cool view is the reflog view. So Git reflog is an interesting animal. What Git reflog is Git reflog is a history of every place your head has been. So if you think of it in terms of when I created a commit, head moves to that point in time. Head is just a pointer at the most recent commit on the current branch that you're working on. So every time I make a commit, head moves to that pointer, points to that commit. So this reflog gives me a way to navigate through history and see all of the commits that I've made, which means I can also potentially go back and let's just say I made a commit on a branch where I added one file, but maybe I actually had 10 files. I decided I didn't need 9. I just needed that one commit. So I can go over using the reflog, find that one commit, and cherry pick it. So it's not going to let me do it here, but it's not going to let me do this particular one, but I can take that one commit and bring it over to my branch. So reflog is a powerful tool. You can also reset with this, so you can roll back to previous points in history. The warning with that, though, is the same as with rebase, is that when you roll back to previous points in history, you're destroying that history. So if you've ever pushed those commits up to GitHub, then you'll create a problem for anyone else who has the copy of the project from GitHub. So if you want to, you can add these tabs to your Java view, so you never have to leave this Java perspective at all. You can stay right here for everything. So with that, I'm really close to the end of time. I want to make sure we have a chance to answer any questions that you have. So if you want to drop those in the Q&A panel, that would be great. Or the other option is probably to drop them in chat. I think I can see both. Yes. All right, so let us know if you have questions. All right, so not seeing any questions, what I'll do, I'll go ahead and talk about a couple of other things that I had on my list. And if you guys have questions as they come up, then by all means, drop them in the GoToWebinar questions panel or in chat, and we'll be happy to answer those for you.
Hi, Cynthia. Sorry, I think I was in a
Hi.
mute. So,
Oh, okay.
and I was talking to myself. I was wondering what's going on. So, first of all, uh, it was really useful, and it's not the end of the story. And we really want to have more and more Git Hub topics. And so far, like I really enjoyed it. I hope other guys as well. The few questions are coming up on the questions tab. I would like to see what Rajesh Shoma Sundaram like. So he has a question. He says, when I create a repository, I get a warning message as creating a repository in Eclipse Workspace is not recommended. If you want, I can chat this question to you, or I can unmute Rajesh if Rajesh wants to talk to you.
Yeah, no, so actually, that's a funny thing. So I get the same warning. I ignored it when it came up, and let me tell you why. So here's what happens when you create a repository. When you already have an existing project and you're adding the Git functionality to that project, what you're actually doing, let me just pull up my command line here and show this to you guys. It's just easier to see it here. Okay, so this is all I've done is just access the same repository from the command line. And if you look, the one thing that creating that repository is doing is it's adding this .git file.
Mm-hmm.
So this .git file is what contains the guts of Git. It's essentially your database, if you will. When folks have done this in the past using the eGit plugin, it has been buggy. I have not had problems with it in Mars. I've done this on several different occasions. So the newest version seems to have sorted that out, and maybe they just didn't feel comfortable removing the warning yet. I still probably wouldn't do it with a large repository. So if this was a case where I was creating a repository or I already had an existing large project that I wanted to initialize, I would do it the old-fashioned way. And so what I would do, let's go back one more. So let's just pretend that my project is going to go in the Scratch directory here, and I'm just going to make a new directory called my project. Feeling super creative today. So now I have this my project directory. I can essentially do the same thing here by typing git init dot. That's going to initialize my project, that directory, as a Git repository. So essentially what it's saying is it would rather have you use this process than the one I showed you on Eclipse where you check the little button and it creates it for you.
Mm-hmm.
So the same rule applies though. You still have to have something to attach to that repository. So right now, if I run git status, it would tell me that I'm on my initial commit and I have these untracked files, which right now is a README. I just created a quick README there before I ran Git status. So it would tell me I was on my initial commit, and it would tell me that I needed to make a first commit. So to do that, I would just, of course, do git add readme.md, git commit, and then, and so now I have my project, which is a repository, and now I could go and open this project inside of Eclipse and have an initialized Git repository as well. So two ways to approach the same thing. I haven't had issues with it using the eGit plugin, but I'm sure as soon as I tell people that, they'll go initialize a project and have a problem. But if you do, email me. I'll help you.
Okay, sounds good. So Rajesh, I have
Uh,
unmute as well. So if you want, you can ask more.
yeah, hi Cynthia.
Hi.
I have another question. And now that we have managed to upload or push the source code from eGit, is it also possible to upload documents or other things outside eGit to GitHub?
Yes. So if you, so I think what you're asking me is what types of things can you put on GitHub as
Yeah.
far as projects and information? Okay. So GitHub is designed really to work best with text-based files. So it's designed for code, right? So it's designed for heavily text-based. It doesn't do great, and it's kind of a Git limitation. It doesn't do great with large binaries. So usually what you see is people won't push their build files. A lot of people don't push Word documents, PowerPoint documents, and things like that because they don't version control well. And it's because of that compression hash that Git's creating. So it's hard to create a 40-character compression hash of a binary file because they're typically huge and practically compression hashes themselves, right? They're so crazy looking. So I think that from a project perspective, the types of files that you would want to send up to GitHub are going to be text-based. Now you can, if you look at GitHub itself, lots of ways to get code onto GitHub. So you can do it using the same process that we just did. You can also literally open your Finder, drop files into your repository, and then do the git add, git commit steps that I just showed you on the command line, and then do a git push.
Okay.
So that's another detailed class. The other thing that we have is we have the ability to upload files directly to Git. So let's say I just want to grab a picture here. See if I have anything interesting. All right, we'll drop this guy. I just told you not to put pictures up there, and now here I am dropping the professor cat up there. So you can just upload directly to, so now I have this professor cat image as well in the repository. So lots of ways you can get files up to GitHub in addition to pushing them as part of the repository.
Okay.
Okay. So can I also upload PDF files?
You can. In PDF, being another binary format, it doesn't version control great, but you can put them up there. I mean, we have PDFs, we have images. We don't recommend large files, especially the repositories themselves top out. I believe it's at 3 gigabytes. I should know this. I apologize. So there is a top limit for the size of files, and the PDFs, it will allow you to contain it as a resource. So if you go in and you look at this particular Professor Cat. That's not a great example because it's going to show me the raw version of it here, but if you put a PDF file, what it'll say is that it can't display that file type, and then view raw, and it'll allow you to open the file. So you can put it there, but the version control of it is not going to be as good as what it would be with the text file or the source file that you used to create the PDF.
Okay.
And depending on what types of PDF you're working with, there are a lot of converters out there that will let you take Markdown, like do Markdown to PDF or ASCII doc to PDF, or some of those other formats that actually make it easier because then you can collaborate on the content outside of the format and then do the conversion.
Okay.
Okay.
I have one last clarification. I'll just have you have already told about it, but I just wanted to clarify. So before I do a pull request, should I push the code and then do a pull request? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So in order to do a pull request out of Eclipse, you'll have to push the content from Eclipse up to GitHub. So and remember, it's because of Git's distributed nature that doesn't happen automatically for you. It waits for you to physically push the code up there, and it won't let you create a pull request if it doesn't recognize that you have branches pushed. So it will prevent you from creating a pull request. So in this particular example, if I clicked new pull request, then it's going to recognize that I don't actually have any other branches here. So a pull request is always going to be a comparison between two branches, and that branch contains the code that you pushed.
Okay. So is it because that we don't have anything in my hello world, and is it only for the first time do we do a push? And for all other times, do we only do a pull request, make a change, and then push code?
Yeah, so the first time when we pushed the content up there, yeah, it was because the repository was empty. So when I created the repository, and I kind of skipped over the step and didn't talk about it a whole lot, but when I created the repository, you notice that I have this option down here of initialize this repository with a README. So you can initialize an empty repository on GitHub and then push your code into that repository, which is the option that we did today. You can also initialize a repository that already has a README in it. So in that case, you could add code to the repository directly on GitHub. You wouldn't have to push anything from your computer in order to start the repository. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. So in case if I'm going to use somebody else's repository, then I don't have to push code in the first place. I would synchronize the workspace and then start making my changes and then do a pull request. Is that right?
Right, yeah, exactly. And what you can do in that case, so if you are working with somebody else's repository, let me just go grab a different repository for GitHub Teacher here. So let's just say, I'm just going to grab this random repository here. Let's say this is my friend's repository that I want to work with him on. I can simply go grab this URL right here. So this is the clone URL. I can copy that and come over to Eclipse. And then from Eclipse, I can import projects. And I can say import existing. Oops, sorry, that's not what I want. Sorry, I don't want a project. What I want is a Git repo.
Okay.
There it is, clone a Git repository. So it's that third icon. They're never quite big enough for me. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
so it's right here, that second option. You would choose clone a repository, and now you can see, again, it's copied that information in. So click next, and down it comes. It'll actually let you choose which branches you want to bring over as well. So you can say, I just want this branch and this branch. And there it is. So now I have my friend's repository, and I can work on that just like any other project.
Okay. To start with, so what I would do is that I would raise a pull request, isn't it? Then I would make my changes and then push my code. Is that right?
So the first thing you would do is create a branch. So looking back at so the branch is important because it allows, you can't create a pull request without a branch. So you would create a branch first. So looking back at Eclipse, I would come here to branches, switch to new branch, and then I'd say no spaces. All right, so I'd create my branch, and now I'm ready to actually do work in the file.
Okay. And then after finishing my changes, do I raise a pull request?
Yes. So after you've finished doing your changes to the file, then what you would do, you would want to commit those changes. So remember that was doing
Yeah.
the stage and then the commit, and then you would push that branch and then open the pull request.
Okay, so I should push and then open a pull request. Is it?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
So I will clone, create a branch, make changes, push, and then pull request.
Perfect. Yes, that's exactly correct.
Okay. And after pull request, is there anything that I have to do, or is it? Am I done? Has my code gone into the repository?
So once you've done a pull request, it's essentially sitting in kind of a holding pattern. So it's waiting for you to say, I want to add. So let me just open one of these random pull requests here. So for this person, they have created a pull request and it's sitting here waiting to be merged. So what happens is it stays on that branch. It's not put into the master line of work until we actually press this green merge pull request button. And once we've pressed the merge pull request button, it's put into master, and then
Okay.
it's done. Yeah, so it's the last step. Now, whether you do that or whether your friend has to do that will depend on the types of permissions you have on his repository.
Okay. So merge pull request is the one that merges into the master.
Correct. Yes.
Can I know what this push request is into? What is the purpose of push request? I see that I'm making the changes, and is it push request? What is the purpose of push request?
So the push request or the
Push request.
yeah. So the push is
Push changes. Sorry,
simply
push changes.
yeah, no, so that's okay. So the push changes, if you think about it this way, when I make the changes on Eclipse, and I'm working on this file, I don't even have to be connected to the internet. I could be on a plane, too cheap to pay for the plane in-flight Wi-Fi, right? So I just could be on a plane, disconnected, working in this repository. What Git does is Git collects all of those changes and commits that I've made and waits for me to say, okay, send them to the remote. So that's what the push is. The push is saying, take my changes and send them up to the remote.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that answers my question. Thanks,
Okay,
Cynthia.
perfect.
Okay. Thanks, Cynthia, for answering these all questions. I really enjoyed.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, I think there's one more question coming from Mukesh.
Okay.
What is the default format for the GitHub Windows file format or Unix as it is text-based?
For the GitHub, for which one? I'm sorry, for the
What is the default format for the GitHub Windows file format? Shall I unmute you, Mukesh? You want to take it? Let me unmute you if you can ask. Sorry, guys, it's a bit extended, but anyway, as
Sure.
you have time, we can go through the. Okay.
okay.
Okay. So, Sanjay, my basic question is, whenever you are committing, since Git is based on the text-based stuff, and there is substantial difference between the Unix files or Windows files, especially for the line feeds and other stuff.
Right. Okay. All right. Yes. All right. Thank you. I understand what you're asking now. Sorry, I was not following. So basically, there's a setting in Git Config. So what you want to set is the auto CRLF. It's auto carriage return line feed. So when you do the config file, let me just grab it real quick. When you go to preferences and you're looking at your configuration, I actually already have mine set. It's core.autocrlf, and if you're working on a Windows machine, you're going to set that to true, and if you're working on Mac or Linux, you're going to set it to input, and that will handle those line endings for you.
Okay. Okay. Does that answer your question, Mukesh?
Yes.
Perfect.
Any more questions, guys, before we conclude the session? Okay. Okay, let's conclude it. I have actually poll to run.
Okay.
I'll ignore it today because we already extended time for the session. So I thanks again, Cynthia, to you, and we really enjoyed it. And
Thank you.
I have recorded the session, and I will share the recording with all of the members. And thank you very much. Good night, everyone. And you, Cynthia, enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you. You too. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, pleasure. Okay, cheers. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.